Hey everybody, this is Ibarionex from the Candid Frame, and it is 112 degrees outside. That's hot. For LA, that is hot. And thankfully, I'm inside and have reasonably working AC, not top-notch AC, but it works well enough. With the aid of a fan, I can be fairly comfortable in this room, though right now it is completely off because all that noise finds its way into the microphone, and I can't have that. So I'm just going to have to endure it for the next 15 or 20 minutes. So enjoy. Anyway, I went out to do a one-on-one with a photographer here in Los Angeles. I do these one-on-one training sessions, which I teach people how to do street photography, or at least my approach to street photography. And one of the things that came to mind while I was out there walking with him and making photographs was the whole idea of not making the usual photograph, making the less than obvious choice whenever you're making a picture. Because whenever at least I encounter a scene, my initial impulse is just to make the photograph, and sometimes I make the obvious photograph. I stand from wherever I discovered the scene and I make the photograph, and I always have to remind myself that that first shot or those initial choices may not necessarily be the very best from which to make a photograph. And also, there are scenes that I might not consider just because they're so obvious. And so it's basically a two-faceted idea that I want to talk about today. And hopefully when I show you the images, you'll have a better understanding of what I'm talking about. But before we start that, I want to let you know or remind you that I have a book coming out in the winter called Making Photographs, Developing a Personal Visual Workflow. And it's based on all the principles that I teach in my workshops and that I share with you on this YouTube video. And it's available for pre-order currently on Amazon. So it's a book that I'm really, really proud of. And I think it's going to be one of the better books that I've written. This is going to be my sixth. And this one is more in the spirit of my first book, Chasing the Light, which some of you may have already purchased and read. So it's a good complement to that. But even if you've not read that first book, I think you'll enjoy this next book, as it really sort of teaches you how to be more thoughtful in terms of making your photographs. So if you enjoy what I've been doing with these videos, I think you'll definitely enjoy the book. So take the time to pre-order a book and let me know what you think once you've had the chance to read it. All right, we're going to start this with a shot by Tillo. This was created with a Fujifilm X-T20 or 1/2000th of a second, f4, ISO 200. Now, perspective plays a big role in when we make photographs. And more often than not, when we see a scene or we see a subject, we photograph from eye level. We raise the camera to our eye, we make the photograph. And too often, we don't consider the alternative. And for me, that usually means me crouching down or shifting my position in some way so that I get away from just shooting solely at eye level. Because regardless of your subject or the scene that you're photographing, there's always another choice to be made. And Tommy here makes a really interesting one by taking this overhead view of this vendor who sells hats. At eye level, you could have included the vendor and the hat and made an interesting shot. But by doing it from overhead, it produces a very different shot. Here, it's not just about documenting that this guy sells hats. The hats themselves, even the sunglasses that are off to the left, they take on a more graphic quality. There's this sort of oval, roundish shape that each of the hats have, and the shapes of the sunglasses have, and it creates this sort of repeating pattern of shape that pervades the entire shot. And then you have also these very strong horizontal and vertical lines. You see this I guess this is the rooftop. We also have these shapes here. There's the shape of the sidewalk itself. We have some texture in the road. There are the shapes of the bins here, in which he no doubt places all of his merchandise when he's done for the day. And then you have the graphic shape of not only his hat to complement this cluster of hats that exist within the center of the frame, but we also have the line and shape created by his arm and his feet. And then we have this great color flourish by the yellow shirt that he's wearing that serves as a really nice counterpoint to the blue that's here. But all of this takes shape as a result of the fact that he's shooting from a rooftop and he's shooting down. And I know that shooting from overhead isn't always practical, especially on the street, because there are plenty of times where I've seen a scene and I just wish, oh my God, I wish I could have access to that apartment so that I could shoot down. It's not always feasible, but when it is, shots like this are possible, and it really makes for an interesting photograph, because you stop looking at the scene as just, oh, here's a vendor with some cool hats. You start breaking it down into line and shape, and in this case, color, and then the lovely gesture that you have of his arm here. We're shooting during the middle of the day, so the light is overhead. So it's a flat quality of light right now, as you can tell by the proximity of the shadows to this guy here. So this isn't early morning or late afternoon. But you can imagine that if this was shot early in the morning or the late afternoon, where the light was more directional, that would add a completely different element to the shot and make it, to my mind, even more interesting, because the shadows would be elongated across the walkway here, and the shapes of these of the tops of the hats would be accentuated by the shadows that they produced on the brim. So I love this shot. I think it's a really marvelous shot, but think about where he could have taken it even further if the light had been in his favor. So if you have an opportunity to return to a space like this when the light is good, man, return to it and make the most of it. I mean, just the fact that you got access to this roof the first time is a good indication that you might be able to do it again and make it even better photograph. But if you can, any of you, I mean, I'm not just talking to Tommy, but if you have an opportunity of finagling a way to get this kind of point of view because you know it could deliver you a great shot, go and just take advantage of it. Next, we have a shot by Bruce J. Patt. This was created with a Nikon D7200 at 1/20th of a second, f9 ISO 500. Now, what struck me about this shot is kind of personal for me. I've been helping my mother-in-law in her house that she's lived in for probably over 40, probably going on 50 years. And we're going through her house, and there's just a lot of stuff there. So when I saw this shot, it immediately reminded of what we're experiencing as we go through our mother-in-law's house, trying to help her organize and clean out some things. And it's a shot that I resonated with, because I realized that as long as I've known my mother-in-law, or even my own family members, I've oftentimes not considered their living spaces as potential material for photographs. I kind of visit them, I inhabit the place with them, I occupy it, I socialize with them. But for some reason, when I enter that space, I never or rarely think about it under photographic terms. And this is one of those shots that I consider less than obvious, because I think all of us have spaces like this that if another photographer came in, they would see the potential of it for an interesting photograph. Because this is an office that is well used. He's got all those books, all those documents, and all those papers. And I know to some people's eye that looks like a lot of clutter, but for me, man, this room, even without the father in there, has a story to tell. And I know from seeing some of the other images that Bruce has produced that he seems to be doing a series of images on his dad, different aspects. So he may be doing a documentary project on his dad. And when you're doing a story like that, whether it's someone you know or not, images like this, these storytelling images are really, really crucial, because an image like this tells you a lot about the person, even though you don't see them physically within the frame. And when you're doing photojournalism and documentary photography, shots like this are just as important as a close-up of the person's face, even if it's an environmental portrait. Small details really are critical to understanding the narrative and the person in a way that you can't capture otherwise. And I really like this shot because I can see that just from the two shots that he has, this is one and the other one was his dad leaving to go to a doctor's appointment or something like that. Both of those shots give you a sense of the space. And both of them are really important shots. So Bruce, if you're seeing this, I really encourage you to keep on this track, because I think you're really on point in terms of what you're doing. But for everyone else, think about your own space or the spaces of family and friends that you visit, and think about it from the context of a photographer, that if you were telling a story, how would you compose a person's living room or kitchen or even bathroom, and try to see it as potential for an interesting photograph. I think you may surprise yourself by discovering things that discovering something that you otherwise might not ever have considered as photo worthy. Next, we have a shot by Palma Lion. We don't have any XF data on this shot. So I looked at this shot, and it took me a moment to register it. And I saw the urgent care, and then my first impulse is, oh, too bad we don't see the person's head in the shot. But then I saw the bandage on the arm, and all of a sudden it connected the fact that this person has just come from urgent care. And even though we don't see their face, that bandage on the elbow told me everything that I needed to know. Because suddenly it became not just a shot where you had an interesting play of light on the building and the light on this figure as he's entering, or he or she is entering the car, because you got this nice play of light and shadow. You got this reflection of this part of the person on the car. You got these interesting shapes of the cars here, and graphically it's a really interesting shot, especially with respect to color. But that little accent, man, that made the shot for me, because that little bandage on the elbow became the storytelling element that provided me the connection between that person and the urgent care building right behind them. And it's such a small little thing. It's just a green bandage. But I like little things like that, because little things like that can make or break a photograph. And in this case, it makes it for me, because without that bandage, I would not make the connection between the two. Obviously that this person is parked in the parking lot, so there might be some relationship between them and the building, but that is cemented in actual fact by the bandage on the elbow. It's kind of like the previous shot. I don't know if this is part of a series in which Paul is following this person and telling their story, but if he were, this would just fit in line perfectly with the previous shot, in which you're capturing an aspect of this person's life or experience for whatever limited time that you're with them as a photographer in order to document it. But again, this is a less than obvious photograph, and I'm sure that a lot of people would pass over this and just go, okay, yeah, and move on. But for me, I guess I'm really sensitive to small details like that, and I really gravitate to storytelling images. That Band-Aid or that bandage, is a tremendous bit of gesture that makes the shot really interesting and makes it really work for me. I hope that gives you some food for thought in terms of, the less than obvious photographs. It's not just about composition. It's also about story and narrative and what you're trying to capture and say in a given photograph. There's so many possibilities, and I just want to encourage you to be open to them and always kind of second guess yourself in terms of the photograph that you're making, and think about why you're making it, and is there a way that you could make it a little better. So keep that in mind as you go out and shoot this weekend. And if you like what I'm doing here on this YouTube channel, we have a podcast, which is even better in my opinion. It is The Candid Frame, and I interview photographers about their experiences and their work, and it's a personal joy of mine to have the opportunity to talk with photographers whose work I really admire and enjoy, and share those conversations with you. And you can go to thecandidframe.com, and you can listen to over 426 interviews that I've conducted over the last decade now. Make myself feel really old. But nevertheless, you can go to The Candid Frame and listen to the recent episode that I did with Rick Salmon, who's a wonderful photographer and everyman. But if you want to download or access the podcast episodes, the best way is to download the Candid Frame app. And there's a link available not only in the notes below for this YouTube video, but also on the Candid Frame website. And that gives you easy access to any of the interviews that you may be interested in taking a listen at. And if you like what you're seeing in these videos, please subscribe and give us a like. And happy shooting, and I'll see you next time.